Remember that old movie called The Odd Couple with Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau? Felix and Oscar. Felix Unger was the neurotic, neat guy. Oscar Madison was the fun-loving slob. They decided to live together and classic comedy ensued. When Jose Baez and Ron Sullivan teamed up, many thought of them as the odd couple. Baez came from the Miami Public Defender's Office. Ron Sullivan was a professor at Harvard Law School. They joined forces to try the Aaron Hernandez case, but they actually aren't an odd couple. They were a perfect match. Two fighters and very skilled trial lawyers. And Aaron Hernandez's case was the toughest case around. He had already been convicted of first-degree murder. He was facing a second murder trial. Everyone thought he was guilty. No one thought it was a case that could be won. And this odd couple came together, which wasn't really odd. Jose Baez and Ron Sullivan. And you're going to hear from Ron Sullivan next as to how they fought against all odds and won an impossible case. I'm David Oscar Markus, and this is For the Defense. Well, today I am really excited. We have Professor Ron Sullivan from Harvard Law School. And Professor Sullivan is the faculty director of the Harvard Criminal Justice Institute, of the Harvard Trial Advocacy Workshop. He teaches criminal law, criminal procedural, trial practice. But besides doing all of that, he's an actual trial lawyer. And that's why we're talking to him today. He tries cases all around the country, including the very fascinating Aaron Hernandez trial. And so we're going to talk about Aaron Hernandez. We're going to talk about trials in general. And welcome to the show, Professor.
Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
So maybe we could just start off talking about, how do you manage trials and your day job teaching? When you're in a trial, it's 24/7. You can't mess around.
Yeah, the key is I just don't sleep much.
Yeah.
I'm kidding. It is a balance. I tell you, I have to really, really carefully schedule these cases around my academic calendar. So my first job is teaching. So I can't take matters that interfere with my teaching schedule. As you point out, you can't always control that, but so far, judges and my clients have been quite understanding. And if I say, hey, I need to push back the start of this for 3 weeks in order to accommodate the academic schedule, so far, so good. Mostly everyone has been accommodating. There's one that wasn't, but we may talk about that later. But other than that, it's mostly been true.
So I imagine that you have to be really careful with the cases you take because you're balancing so much. And so when you get involved in a case like Aaron Hernandez, how do you decide that that's a case for you that you're going to take on such a massive undertaking?
Well, so usually it is a matter that has some sort of appeal in terms of an issue that I think is of national import. And I will take it on, or a client who is just deeply in need of assistance because everyone's running in the other direction. And that was Aaron Hernandez, particularly here in Boston, the Boston area. Folks here are really, really serious about their sports. And when a sports icon is perceived to have done something bad, and you'll recall he had been convicted already of the Odin Lloyd murder. He was sort of persona non grata in these parts. So it was particularly appealing then for me because I deeply believe when people are out on a figurative island and nobody will represent them, then it's incumbent on good lawyers to step up and step in and do the representation. So that's a factor in the decision when I represented Aaron.
It's interesting. There were two trials, obviously, and we should give a little background to our listeners about that. But at the first trial, he still had the support of the community. People were coming to the courthouse. People were supporting him. People were outside, cheering for him. He gets convicted at that first trial. And then it seemed,
really there was no one around at the second trial other than his wife sitting in the first row every day. I mean, what a difference between trial number 1 and trial number 2.
Yeah, hugely different. As I mentioned, he was a pariah by the time I took on the representation for trial 2. Had lost most of his support. You're right. His wife, Shiana, was there religiously, and there was a spattering of other folk who would come, but other than that, not many.
And so when you get ready for trial number 2, where do you go? You go meet with him in the jail and start to develop that kind of relationship with him just by meeting him at the jail, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah, we had not met before, so the very first meeting was in the jail. It's not an ideal place to meet a client for the first time and start developing that attorney-client relationship. But you do what you have to do. So met him in the jail, and then we were able to start building a rapport from there. Jose Baez and I should say, met him in the jail. He was my trial partner, and we met Aaron together.
My father was a lawyer, and he did family law he did some criminal, but he always told me the family clients that he visited, he saw them at their worst. They were ready to go to war. They weren't nice during the divorce. Criminal law clients, typically when we see them, they're treating us really well. They need us. They're respectful. How was Aaron with you all when you first met him?
He was great. He was delightful, respectful. The general proposition, though, is absolutely true. I know family lawyers, too, and they say, it is much, much worse doing family law than doing, murders and mayhem cases and malicious disfigurement. So you're not the first person I've heard that from. I think your father was right. But yes, he was incredibly thankful, respectful. But the one thing I remember when he first walked into the room is that, this is what a professional athlete looks like. I mean, it just his presence and bearing was unique. And then he walked in and then flashed the most radiant smile I think I've ever seen. And from that point on, I mean, he was just really, really grateful that Jose and I were working with him.
That's great. And, you mentioned Jose. I know Jose back from the Miami days. You guys seem like a really interesting trial couple. How did you hook up with Jose?
Well, we've had a number of successes across the country. And so so as trial partners, that relationship has gone well. And we're very close friends as a function of having worked together. I guess it could have gone in the other direction too. We could have started working together and hated each other's guts, but thankfully it went in the correct direction. So we got to know each other because I invited Jose to be a teaching faculty member at the Harvard Criminal Justice Institute, or more precisely, the Trial Advocacy Workshop, where I'm the faculty director. And it's a soup to nuts trial program, a 3-week intensive program, starting with client interview all the way up to jury trials, where I bus in jurors for the students to try a case. And I bring in about 75 lawyers and judges over the 3 weeks in 1-week stints. So I never met Jose. I had seen his work from Casey Anthony, and I just called him up. And one benefit of being at Harvard is, for whatever reason, everyone takes your call. So it's
that's right.
That's a good thing. So he takes the call, and I invite him to become a faculty member. He came up for the first week of the program. We had a lot of similar interests. We had both begun our careers as public defenders. I in the better public defender office in D.C. He in a good one, but not quite as
I don't know about
mine.
that. I may have to take you on about that, Professor.
I love it. We tease each other constantly about that. But in all seriousness, we hit it off, and then we started trying cases together. And after we won the Hernandez case, then we sort of became a really popular team after that.
That's really cool. And I know you've tried cases all around and have developed this great trial partnership. It's hard to find a person that you can try cases with because you are living with each other night and day, fighting, and it's hard to find a good match for a trial partner.
Yeah, and we're both type A personalities. So it's amazing that we've been able to do it, but it's worked, and it's worked marvelously.
That's awesome. And I wanted to ask you about the trial program that you lead and you teach. I get a lot of questions after these podcasts air from young lawyers saying, what should I read to become a better trial lawyer? What books, what's out there, what resources? Can you give any recommendations, since I got you, for young lawyers who are looking to become better trial lawyers?
Well, for young lawyers, I would definitely brush up on all the trial practice books you can find. Maui has a zillion of them, everything from jury selection through closing arguments, and they are great in terms of giving you the fundamentals, and you can get reacquainted with these fundamentals, and for some, for the first time, sort of learn what the time-tested fundamentals are. Peter Murray has a wonderful book I use in my class, Introduction to Trial Advocacy, or words to that effect, and that's what I use. And my internet is doing something funny again. I hope you can still hear and see me.
I got you still. So let's get into the trial a little bit. Yep. To give the folks the background. I mean, like we said before, Aaron Hernandez had already been convicted. He's coming into trial number 2. His supposed friend, this guy, Alexander Bradley, is pointing the finger at him and saying that Hernandez shot 2 people and killed them, and also shot his friend, Alexander Bradley. And so going in, the strategy is, let's point the finger at Bradley as the bad actor in the case.
Yeah, I mean, that was certainly part of it, and that was, I think, accurate. When we read the discovery, though, we were each almost instantly amazed at how little evidence it was against Aaron, and how the only person who presented evidence against Aaron was, just happened to be the guy that had the most to lose in the situation. So on the one, if you listen to the media or if you read the papers, you would have thought it was a slam dunk case. And we read the discovery, and if his name had been, Jose Hernandez instead of Aaron Hernandez, no way would they have even indicted that case. I mean, the evidence we thought was that slim. So we went into the case really confident that we would get an acquittal. The difficult part was that he had been convicted of a murder and everybody in the city knew it. And so would he actually get the presumption of innocence? That was the hard part. But in terms of evidence, there was precious little against him.
You mentioned celebrity and his name. A lot of people out there think that if you have a celebrity name, you get justice, it's easier to get justice being a celebrity, that the media gives you the benefit of the doubt, the jury gives you the benefit of the doubt, the judge gives you the benefit of the doubt. I mean, in a lot of these cases, just the opposite is true.
It's absolutely just the opposite. That may well have been the case in a bygone era, but now, when the media sort of gets its tentacles on a celebrity, I mean, they dig and push and, just expose every bad thing that the person's ever done in life. Equally important when a celebrity is on the other side of the V, a defendant in a criminal case, the prosecutor's office really gears up. They do everything by the book, so to speak. They do everything, the things that they never do in the majority of cases. They've got their best prosecutors, the best detectives, they're taking DNA. I mean, all the stuff that you just never see in a run-of-the-mill case. So it's really these days very tough going for a celebrity who finds himself or herself in trouble. And that's one of the things, frankly, Jose and I have built an expertise around. You do have to think about these cases a little differently, I've learned. In fact, I might even teach a course on it one day, because it's quite an interesting balance that you have to have when you're representing a celebrity. You shouldn't go into these cases cold.
Would celebrity work for or against Aaron Hernandez? We'll find out in For the Defense next. As you can probably tell, I love trials, and I love studying old trials. One of my favorite trials to read about is the Scopes Monkey trial back in 1925. It pitted William Jennings Bryan, who was one of the all-time great orators back in the day. He was known as the Great Commoner. He was the Secretary of State. He ran for president 3 times, and he was, unfortunately, anti-evolution and fighting this case against one of the greatest all-time lawyers, Clarence Darrow, who was going after Bryan. It was a clash of the titans back in the day. Everybody wanted to know what happened and what was going on in this trial, and the press was covering it, and there were mixed press messages about the case until Clarence Darrow called Bryan to the stand. Can you imagine calling your opponent to the stand? And the judge wasn't going to hear of it. He wasn't going to allow it to happen. But Bryan insisted. He wanted to go toe-to-toe with Darrow and thought being called as a witness would allow him to debate Darrow and win the day. And so I'm going to talk a little bit during these cut-ins about Darrow versus Bryan in the Scopes Monkey trial. Before we do so, let's get back to Aaron Hernandez and Professor Sullivan next and For the Defense.
It's also interesting, you mentioned the prosecutor going the extra mile. In this case, it seems like they went a little overboard because they gave immunity, full immunity, to a guy with a huge rap sheet, a guy who, much worse position than Aaron Hernandez. And so they were really stretching, it seems like, to get your guy.
A bad rap sheet, and something that never got in evidence, unfortunately, is that Bradley, on a prior occasion, had gotten into an argument with someone at a nightclub in nearby Rhode Island, I believe it was. Maybe it was Connecticut. Went back to the car, got a gun, and started shooting. So you had this guy.
Holy cow. Yes,
exactly. And the judge, for just a reason I'll never understand, never allowed us to present that in evidence. So you've got a guy who points a finger at Aaron, as you say, has this long rap sheet. He was a huge, significant, profitable drug dealer for years before he went to jail. And in order for their theory to make sense, Bradley told them that they were driving, and Aaron had to use, the little button on the side of your seat and make the seat go way back as he reached over the car out the driver's side window to shoot these shots. And that's it just doesn't make any sense. It really doesn't make any sense.
One of the things that really interested me in reviewing this case and going back and looking at it was this witness also claims he was shot by your guy. Right. That Aaron Hernandez shot him and left him for dead. I didn't see much about the defense on that. Did you all say that was just made up? He was obviously shot in the head. Did you say he was shot by someone else, or what happened there?
Yeah, he was shot by someone else. There was a drug deal gone bad. The jury realized that Bradley was a drug dealer. That was his profession, and that it was a drug deal gone bad. And if you look at the early correspondence before, immunity came, Bradley was very clear that it was not Aaron Hernandez. It was only after, forms of immunity got waved around. And the government, I think they did go overboard. They immunized almost everybody. And this was about 5 or 6 years ago, this case, almost 7 years ago, back when the old Oprah Winfrey show was still very present in people's minds. And, at one point, Jose called the prosecutor the Oprah Winfrey of immunity. You get immunity, and you get immunity, and you get immunity. And those people familiar with Oprah remember her big giveaways where she would say, "You get it, you get it, you get it," and the jury got it because it was just like.
Did they like that? Did they respond?
This big giveaway, yeah.
That's great. I know, too, you had to get over this hurdle, as you said, about Aaron having been convicted at trial number 1. When you do voir dire, first of all, in Massachusetts, do you get a lot of attorney-conducted voir dire?
Well, we certainly did in this case. The judge, to his credit, gave us a great voir dire. I mean, the judge recognized, I think, that this would be one area particularly susceptible to appeal because of the pretrial publicity. So we got a great voir dire. And your question, that's the absolute right question. And as a trial lawyer yourself, you zeroed down into it. That's precisely where we started trying the case in voir dire. We figured everyone would know, or another juror at some point would tell them if they didn't know. And so right then, we start drilling down on areas like, if the judge orders you to put something aside and you take an oath and you swear that you will not use something in your consideration, are you able to do this? And these sorts of questions for people who told us they knew, and we would pepper them with very specific questions. Are you sure you can put that aside? Wouldn't that bother you? And we would go back and forth and hopefully attempt to weed out people who were going to be overly biased and keep in people who said that they would make an effort to be fair. And then at the end, right, you say something like, we chose you. We chose you because you swore to us that you could try this case free of any bias, free of anything you heard on television, free of anything you read in the newspaper. And we trusted you on that. And we know you can do it. And we know that you're going to do it. Right. And so, it's like the seamless thing from voir dire all the way to the end where you do that. And because you can't put your head in the sand and pretend that they don't know. That's the worst thing to do. Right.
And it's amazing because, like you said, when somebody has a prior like that, everybody knows it and he's a celebrity. As much as you can tell the jurors to put it out of your mind, it's in their mind. So you have to talk about it. And the other thing you mentioned, Professor, is the media having already convicted your client. In a lot of these cases, again, when you're dealing with celebrities, I hate to throw around fake news. It's a term that's thrown around too much now. But in a lot of these celebrity trials, what I'm hearing from the folks that I'm interviewing is that the media is quick to convict before they've even seen the discovery or heard the evidence.
Yes. And it was amazing here in that respect. And the real-time coverage was just as amazing. So one of the things in that case, we were sure that we had won just about every day. So one of the ways Jose and I connect is that we both have this similar theory that you try to win every day at trial. You try to come out, every day. And with the exception of 1 or 2 days that were probably a tie, we were sure we'd won every day. So we go in there and just do a bang up job and then see the evening news and they pick out some odd little detail suggestive of guilt and run with it. And we would think, are you watching the same trial that we're watching?
It's unbelievable.
And so, yeah.
It's frustrating. But I guess you guys got the last laugh.
No, definitely. And we were really, really confident. And that's hard to say in a homicide case, but
I'd say so.
We really thought that the evidence came in really, really well, despite a few just awful rulings. One of which, and a lot of people don't know, so the government's theory was that Aaron spilled a drink on somebody, and somebody spilled a drink on Aaron. I'm sorry, and Aaron got really angry and followed those guys and shot them. And this is what Bradley fed the government. We found a guy. He was a serviceman who said that summer in one of those theater district nightclubs, he accidentally spilled a drink on Aaron Hernandez, who was wearing a white T-shirt. And Aaron said, "Hey, man, that's okay," and went and bought this guy a drink. Now, the guy was overseas somewhere in active duty, and the court just would not enforce a subpoena for us to get him to testify in video. So what happened, Bradley took an actual real life circumstance. Yes, a guy did spill a drink on Aaron, but the result of that thing was different. Now, Aaron bought the guy a drink and said, it's all good. Now, what, so I guess the government could have said, oh, that was another guy in another day. But what's the likelihood of that happening?
Right.
Yeah, right. And so we think if that evidence had come in, the jury would have come back even quicker with.
Let me ask you, why wouldn't that guy come voluntarily and testify?
He wouldn't. I don't know. I mean, to this day, I don't know.
Yeah.
Partly it may have been because of no one wanted to be perceived as helping Aaron, because by that time he was Aaron Pariah, not Aaron the football star. So that may have been it. But I don't know. He didn't tell us, didn't have to tell us, but he did not voluntarily consent to the subpoena, and the court would not enforce it.
What a shame. You mentioned the Oprah shtick that Jose did, and I saw some of his opening where, he really went after Bradley and said, look, if Aaron wanted to deal with Bradley, he's this athlete. Bradley's 5'7". He didn't need a gun. He could have gone and dealt with him. I love that part of Jose's opening and the Oprah part that you mentioned, and we'll talk about the cross in a second. But my question is, a lot of the other people who are watching the podcast and get back to me say, are you born a trial lawyer, or is it something you can learn and develop? I mean, is that, things like doing the Oprah and that opening with Jose and how you talked about voir dire, are those things that we just naturally have, or you can learn over time?
I think I think both, but I'm going to focus on that you can learn over time, and that's what I believe, and that's what I teach. Now, clearly, some people are born with one of these stentorian voices that just command every courtroom and so forth, and that's great, But a lot of people aren't, and you and I know trial lawyers who speak barely above a whisper. Mm-hmm. Wear a pair of glasses, talk very slowly, but they too can command the attention of their audience because they have learned the craft. So what I just did there was I changed the pace of my voice. I emphasize things by spacing between my words. These are all parts of the craft that you can teach. And, it's actually what I do teach at Harvard. So people from all walks of life can be really outstanding trial lawyers if you put the time into it. And some people have great gifts and they, make start, a little bit, up, right? LeBron James was born to be 6'9" and 250, or didn't do about that. But, look, Isaiah Thomas is one of the greatest of all time. He was 6'1", and I mean the Isaiah Thomas of my era.
I remember.
The other IP is a great player as well. So you can you take what you've got and you can maximize it in a way so everyone can use their particular skill set.
I bet you weren't expecting an Isaiah Thomas reference in this podcast. Don't worry, we'll get back to the trial and for the defense next. So I don't know whether Clarence Darrow or William Jennings Bryan were born great trial lawyers or great orators, or whether they just worked at it. But the spectacle of them going back and forth was pretty amazing. When you go back and look at these transcripts, it just jumps off the page. When Bryan took the stand, Darrow began with a very simple and quiet question. You have been given considerable study to the Bible, haven't you, Mr. Bryan? Brian said, "Yes, I have. I have studied the Bible for about 50 years." And then Darrow just attacked him. He asked him about the whale swallowing Jonah, Joshua making the sun stand still, Noah and the great flood, the temptation of Adam in the Garden of Eden, the creation according to Genesis. Darrow even got Brian to finally admit that not everything in the Bible should be taken literally. So Darrow did not give up at that point because he smelled blood in the water. He asked Brian whether the earth was created in 6 days, and were those 6 days 24-hour days. Brian answered, "My impression is that they were periods." And so Darrow, at this point, had really shown that Brian did not interpret the Bible literally. And even though Brian began his testimony calmly, he really began to stumble after Darrow continued to prod him. At one point he said, "I do not think about the things I don't think about." And Darrow followed up, "Do you think about the things you do think about?" And everybody started laughing. It just shows how important it is to listen during cross-examination to the answers and then to keep on, not to just follow an outline. And Darrow was such an expert at that. You'll see how Baez and Sullivan were experts at it in this Aaron Hernandez case as they listen to the witnesses' answers and go after him. And we'll get back to the Scopes Monkey trial at the next cut-in and for the defense next.
When you took on this case, did you get the backlash that you've gotten for other cases? I know in the Harvey Weinstein case, obviously that's well documented how horrible you were treated from all different kinds of people. How about in this case? Were you getting a lot of backlash?
No, not at all. Not at all. It was I actually got no backlash, and people came with people came to court, students and the like, to see it. The Harvey Weinstein thing was a loud minority of undergrads and complete utter shameful cowardice from Dean Gay and Dean Khurana at Harvard College, who simply couldn't tell 19-year-olds that you may have something to learn about open and free dialogue. And it was just a craven sort of capitulation by Claudine Gay and Rakesh Khurana to the lowest common denominator. I mean, that's what happened with Harvey, but with Aaron, I mean, just nothing. Or cases before then or since then, there's been nothing. So,
did you have your students work on the case with you at all? Did some of the students get a chance to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. For all of my cases, I have students work on them. I was always fascinated, well before I came to law school, by this figure I'd heard about called Alan Dershowitz, who would have kids, young people over his home working on these appeals and everything. And that was kind of my stylized notion. So by the time I started my career as a professor at Yale, I included students in all of my outside work. And when I came over to Harvard, I did the same thing. So
I was in Dershowitz's class during the OJ trial.
Oh, my goodness.
And so I was there when he was coming in and talking about trial and class. And we have him coming up on the podcast as well. So he's going to talk about OJ and how the verdict and everything during law school. It was an amazing reaction. Half the students cheered and half the students were shocked and upset at that verdict. It was amazing.
Well, you remember the split screens the TV would do around the country. That was something else. Yeah,
it really was. Let me ask you, the text messages you mentioned getting from Bradley, how early on the text messages didn't suggest Aaron at all. And then he gets immunity. And then all of a sudden the text messages shift. Were those text messages provided in discovery, or did you have to fight about getting them? How did you get his text messages?
No, we did not have very many discovery battles. That is one of the shining moments of this case. The prosecutorial team said from the beginning that, we're going to play fair and let the chips fall where they may. and they, for the most part, just gave us everything. So for 99.9% of the homicide cases I try, I mean, it's just vicious, nasty battles about discovery. That's half the game. Here, some minor things here or there, but nothing significant. We were able to try a case, and it was a well-tried case. Hats off to the prosecution team as well. They did a really stand-up job in that case.
So, Professor, one of the main text messages, and in getting ready for this interview, I watched a bunch of the trial, and one of the text messages that comes up over and over and over again is that text he sends to his lawyer, that Bradley sends to his lawyer,
yes,
where he talks about perjury, and am I going to get in trouble for perjury if I testify like this? And all I could think about was that was a text message to his lawyer.
Right.
So how did you get a text message from him? First, can you tell us about that text message, why it was so significant, and how you got it?
Well, so the text message, you've described it well. He was saying, will I get in trouble if I perjure myself about Aaron's involvement in all of this? Because before, recall, he had said that Aaron was not involved in any way. So Bradley was concerned that he'd get up there and perjure himself about Aaron's involvement, and we got it through normal discovery. I suppose your question is why was that not privileged? I don't recall us having to fight about that. That it came in the normal chorus, but it would not have been privileged because it would have been used for the purposes of impeachment. And I mean, that would have been our legal theory as to why this wasn't an attorney-client privilege. And Bradley was immunized anyway. So, there was no harm to it coming in. But that's one we didn't have to fight about anyway.
A lot of times when these witnesses get immunity, at least in federal court, the prosecutor insists that they give over their phone and their computer so they can review everything. And an immunized witness has to sort of open up and say, here's everything I got.
Yeah. So that's, I'm sure, how the government got it. So under a number of theories, I mean, it's Brady. It would have, we had a right to it. And I guess Pat figured he didn't want to fight about it. And to his credit, that's the prosecutor. He gave us everything, so we really didn't. We fought about admissibility, right? But everything was on the table.
So I saw at the first trial, the state called Bill Belichick, and I'm sorry, the state called Robert Kraft at the first trial, and Kraft was actually a prosecution witness because it was odd how Aaron Hernandez called him about the timeline, but Bill Belichick was listed for you guys as a potential witness. You end up not calling him. What happened there? You guys were just feeling confident and didn't need him, or what happened with Belichick?
Yeah, that was it. We were feeling really confident. And I know that sounds surprising in a homicide case of this sort, but it's the sort of thing where, and this, the defense can very easily snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. And we thought we had this thing won. And the more you start opening doors, sometimes the worse it could get. And, what we had with Bill Belichick would have been relatively minor, a detail here or there. But look, nothing that we couldn't have asked the jury to draw reasonable inferences about. So we decided to keep it really simple and go to the jury because we didn't think that they had proven a case anywhere close to beyond a reasonable doubt.
Was the team, the organization, supportive by the time of the second trial, or because he was convicted, they were sort of standoffish at this point?
Standoffish would be a wonderfully rich euphemism.
I imagine so.
Yeah.
One of the things that also jumped out at me from the trial, Professor, is you and the judge going at it.
Yes.
And I loved it. I love seeing you fight with the judge and stand up for your client. And, one of the places it came up was at the time of deliberations. And so if I can just set the stage and tell me a little about it.
Right.
In Massachusetts, there's this crazy rule. I had never seen this before, where the judge can pick the foreperson.
Right.
And the jury is a very diverse jury, which is great for you. And he ends up picking a white woman for the foreperson. And why don't you take it from there and what happens and how you deal with that?
Well, yes. So there is this very odd rule in Massachusetts, and for your listeners / viewers, usually it's done in one of two ways. One, the foreperson is whoever happens to be in a pre-assigned seat, seat 12, seat 6, seat 1. There's some courtroom rule everyone knows in advance, and that's the foreperson. And in other places, the minority rule is you kind of pick a number out of a hat. That's the foreperson. Now, when you don't do any of those, the jurors themselves go inside, go to the back, and they decide their own foreperson. But in terms of court involvement, when the court decides, it's usually randomized in the two ways that I described. So, but in Massachusetts, yes, the court can decide the foreperson. And the difficulty was that the court and the person whom he chose as the foreperson had this consistent nonverbal communication going on every day. The trial was on camera, which was a good thing, and you could see the judge. So every morning after a certain point, he would come in, turn to his left, and do one of these smiles and nods to a particular juror who was sitting in the first seat, and she would smile and nod back, and Jose and I were sitting there like, I don't, there's nothing wrong with it per se, but we didn't like it. We absolutely didn't like it. That level of warmth seemed problematic, and the reason lawyers don't like that is because to the degree that the judge, even unconsciously, sort of seems to favor one side or another, one argument or another, you don't want that impacting the jury. So the judge chose her. We raised an objection, and then the judge said something, and that's what really started the very heated back and forth between the court and I. This is a person who obviously listened, paid attention, and understood the evidence. And I found that offensive to the minority jury pool. So it was a mainly minority jury pool. And for this judge to say that this one out of maybe two white women was the only one who was paying attention and who clearly understood the evidence, I thought it was not only on a moral register offensive to the Black and brown women on that jury, but as a constitutional matter that it violated equal protection, because my client has a right under the Equal Protection Clause for all of his jurors to be treated fairly and equally, and no one sort of be picked out and elevated, prejudicing the others. And so we, that was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. And a lot came out, if you've listened to it, about the court's rulings, about the way in which the court spoke to the defense as opposed to the way the court spoke to the prosecution, and to the judge's credit, after that, it was extraordinarily heated. After that, he came back and stopped cutting us off and that sort of thing. I doubt he was really listening to the arguments, but at least as a formal matter, he stopped being rude And, I mean, I knew that he was not going to give us any rulings. And we know that going in the defense, that he's going to rule with the prosecution, the supermajority of the time. But what I didn't want and had to stop was him belittling the defense in front of the jury and making snide comments and that sort of thing. That had to stop.
Well, you said what we all want to say so often to judges is, when he asked you if you were done, and you said, if you're gonna cut me off, yeah, I wish you don't cut the prosecutors off when they're arguing. And I cheered when you said it, because so often judges don't even realize how they're treating the defense in front of the jurors as compared to the prosecution.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's the key. They really don't realize it. It's an unconscious bias, and it's true. They sit and listen and are polite and so forth. And you say 2 or 3 words, and they're chopping your head off. Now, I have the benefit of not being a repeat actor in the courts where I practice, so I can take a little more latitude. And so I got calls from across the country. Wow, I wish I could have said that, but that they'll take it out on you in the next case if you're sort of a repeat actor in that court. But it is freeing
it's freeing to be able to try cases in other parts. I try cases outside of Miami as well, and that you're going there once and you won't appear in front of that judge probably ever again. So there is some freedom in doing that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's almost time for the verdict in For the Defense. Next. So Darrow had crushed Brian on the stand. He had bested this orator, this man who was known for defending the Bible and attacking evolution. And it was so bad that the judge at the end of the day said that he was not going to permit Brian to retake the stand tomorrow, and that the entire testimony was stricken from the record. It was time for closing, and Darrow actually asked the jury to find his client guilty so that he could appeal up to the Tennessee Supreme Court. And we know what happened after that. Darrow won the case, and evolution was permitted to be taught in schools. The crazy thing is that Brian was so devastated by the cross and the press coverage of the cross. He died 5 days after the trial ended, and many said he died as a direct result of what had happened in the courtroom and his humiliation. While that's not clear, Darrow's legend grew, and you'll hear in the next segment how Professor Sullivan and Jose Baez win this Aaron Hernandez case and how their legend has grown. In For the Defense, next.
One of the other things about picking the 4-person that I thought was interesting, this crazy rule in Massachusetts, is you don't deselect the alternates until after the 4-person is picked. So what the judge is doing is ensuring that one juror gets to stay on. And he had told, I think you made this point, he had told everybody, you all have an equal shot at being on the jury, but he changed that by picking the 4-person.
Yes.
And so everybody had a little less of a shot because she was locked in.
You're right. Actually, I made that argument. I thought it was a good one. But that's absolutely right. He said it. And again, it was on tape that you all have an equal shot. And that wasn't true. And the other odd Massachusetts thing, in terms when they did get around to selecting the alternates, they put it in a wheel and they pull out numbers, and nobody gets to see it except the courtroom clerk and the judge. And they tell us it's number 4 and number 7. But unlike anything else in any courtroom where transparency is the primary value, I don't know to this day what numbers were actually on there. I do know that the juror we liked absolutely best was taken off the pool and was alternate. Jeez. And so here, let me be clear. I have no evidence that was not the case. But this is why courtroom proceedings are transparent and why you put everything on the record. Your Honor, he's pointing his pointer finger up toward the ceiling. I mean, we go ad nauseum to put things on the record. And for that aspect to be secret is an artifact of some historical era in Boston courts that really needs to change.
Insane. You also talked about, Professor, the cameras in the courtroom, and you said as an aside that it's a good thing. I take it from that you like the proceedings being televised and on TV, because I've had mixed feelings about that from some of the guests. Why do you like cameras in the courtroom?
Well, I do, because I think the public gets a chance to actually see
right
what really goes on inside the courtroom. I think in short order, the advocates forget it's there. So one concern is that people are going to be mugging for the cameras, and you might have a little of that, but serious lawyers, very soon, you don't know it's there because you're too focused on the case. But, to actually see the judge, yelling at people and yelling at the advocates when the jury's gone, and then the jury comes back in and the court's always, how's everybody? And, it's this Jekyll and Hyde thing.
Yeah.
I think the public should see that. There was just this tweet going around where someone, where there was a recorded over Zoom arraignment, and this judge got angry because the litigant said yeah instead of yes, and doubled the bail from $1,000 to $2,000. I mean, just completely, plainly, wholly unconstitutional.
Brutal.
I mean, no arguments here. And people need to see that this is what goes on in courtrooms. So I think net, it is a good thing. You've got issues about privacy and whatnot. We had one episode where the camera panned over into the jury box, and then they shut down for like a day or something. But if you work those things out, then everything else will be okay.
I'm with you. I wish the federal courts would open up a little bit more. They're starting
Agreed.
to, but it's really difficult. So jury instructions go to the jurors. 53 pages I saw. I don't know how jurors understand any of this. And the jury is out 6 days, the worst part of any trial. I mean, you think you've won every day, and then they're sitting out 6 days. You must have been dying.
We're like, what in the world are they thinking about there? And that's just the tough part. And you just can't function. You almost just kind of just sit there. At least when I was a public defender, I'd have to go to the next courtroom because another trial would be starting, and you can kind of get distracted. But here now, when I do one case at a time, you sit and brood.
Right. No, it's true. It's the worst part. The longest I've ever had one out is 9 days, and I couldn't function either. It was brutal. One of the other weird things about Massachusetts, and I don't know how it was when you were a PD in DC, but I saw that in Massachusetts, the defense closes first, which I had never seen that before. Good thing or bad thing for the defense to close first?
I think it's about the same.
Yeah.
So it's the same norm. The party with the burden goes last. But the way it works out in most places is prosecution goes, defense goes, and then they have a shorter rebuttal. Right. Either way, once you sit down and you can't get back up, it's just the worst to listen to that. But I suppose it's pluses and minuses. On the plus side, so we have in the law, I'm not sure if your audience is all lawyers or not. But
got a lot of them.
I'm sorry.
There's a lot of lawyers who listen, plus my mom.
Well, to your mom, then, is your mom a lawyer?
No, she's not.
Okay. So mom, we have this principle about primacy and recency in the law. People remember best what they hear first and what they hear last. So in the Massachusetts system, we get to stand up first. And the notion here is that at least we got to frame the arguments in a certain way and try to bait the government into responding to our arguments. So that's primacy. That's a good thing. But then they get to go last, and that's recency. So it 6-1/2.
One of the things that I saw happen in closing for the government, for the state, is they argued about Aaron's tattoos. And they made a big deal about the God forgives tattoo. I guess he had a tattoo that said God forgives. And they said that was a confession. And of course, you got very upset about that, rightfully so, and objected. and went at it with the judge. The judge let them argue that, which seemed very beyond the pale, that a tattoo, he had 1 million tattoos.
Right.
Would that have been a good issue for the appeal if you had lost?
Oh, it would have been a great issue for the appeal. That a tattoo is somehow a statement that they can frame as a confession, and confession as it's a technical word, and the whole body of law surrounds this notion of a confession. It absolutely would have been a great thing on appeal. Now, we really made fun of that when I crossed his fiance, Shiana, cross in scare quotes, because it was the friendliest cross that you've ever seen. But
Right.
but I came up with, and for young lawyers out there, sometimes you can prove positive points by showing the absence of things. And I gave all sorts of examples of things that happened in Aaron's life and asked him, did he get a tattoo about it? And the answer, of course, was no. When he got signed by the Patriots, did he get a tattoo of Bill Belichick on him? No. And you were able to argue at the end that, he's not doing like writing a novel on his arms and backs. They were tattoos. I mean,
Sure.
he was addicted to those tattoos. He had a lot of them, but they weren't, you couldn't rely on them telling a story about his life. And that just seemed absurd.
So Ron, they're out 6 days, they come back and it's not guilty. And it's so dramatic when you get that verdict. When you come into the room, that feeling of waiting for the jury to announce it, there's nothing like it. People, non-lawyers can't understand. There's nothing like that in the world.
That's right. It's almost painful. It takes so long to actually get to the words, either guilty or not guilty. And you're literally on pins and needles. It's very difficult.
And you win, you get the not guilty. One of the things that I've talked about with other folks is how do you deal with that after? Do you go party? I mean, your client's is still in jail. I see how happy he was initially, hugging you guys and everything else. What do you and Jose and the whole team do that night?
No, well, nothing. We were exhausted,
Right.
Mentally, physically, emotionally exhausted. But you're right. In this kind of case, it was a definitely much more subdued win, because the client was already in prison for murder. But we went back to see him. He was extraordinarily happy. He asked us then if we would take over his appeal, because he was feeling real good at that point about probably overly ambitious about our ability and the likelihood of winning an appeal. But he was in that space, asked us if we would do his appeal. He talked about going back to football, and he said, "I'll never forget this." He said, "Well, maybe not with the Patriots." And I was like, "Yeah, I think that's fair. That's a fair conclusion, Aaron." He said, "Maybe not with the Patriots, but I'd like to get back into the game." I mean, he was really feeling just this sense of hope,
As he should.
and then for what happened, a few days later, just blindsided me.
It's amazing, Professor, that happened a few days later. And you say blindsided. It seemed like it blindsided everybody because you had just won and he had hope again. And so it's hard to understand, hard to explain what happened.
It's really impossible to explain what happened. And to this day, I'm really not clear as to what motivated it. It'll be one of the mysteries that I will die not having resolved, because you're right. He was very hopeful. Shiana had just talked to him on the phone. She was coming to see him in a couple of days. I mean, it was it's a mystery.
One of the theories out there in the media and some of these documentaries is that, if he had done that, the first conviction gets abated. And so what abatement is, for those who are listening, is if you're still on direct appeal, the conviction isn't final yet. And so there's this old doctrine called abatement where if you die while you're on appeal, the conviction is taken away. And so people thought maybe he was trying to get his conviction from the first case abated to take care of his family. And then Massachusetts changed the law.
Right.
And so they got rid of the abatement doctrine in Massachusetts. Pretty stunning change to change a law because of one case like this.
Yes, and to make it retroactive, it was quite stunning by the Supreme Judicial Court. The theory, though, is clearly false. I can say as his lawyer that it's not as though he had money that was tied up in some way as a function of his conviction. So that's just that would not have been a motivation. Aaron was broke, unfortunately. There was his first conviction being dismissed would not have released any monies to his family. So no, that's not the case.
So as we come to the close here, Professor, I mean, first of all, an incredible victory. It just to win a case where everybody knows he's been convicted of murder, it's unheard of. It's unheard of. And so congratulations on such an amazing win and a teaching tool for your students. I mean, what's the big takeaway from the trial that you can tell folks and tell your students after a case like this?
Well, the big takeaway is that you approach each trial in the same way. So don't be defeatist going in, but you've got this method, or at least I teach this method. This is the way you approach the case, and there's no mountain that's too high to surmount. That if you do these things well, do these things faithfully, you've got as good a chance as any to come out victorious. And the Aaron Hernandez case really proved that, I think.
What an inspiration. One of the reasons I'm doing this is it's as a guy who tries cases, it's great to get inspired and get reinvigorated for the next trial, and hearing stories like this is wonderful. So I just want to thank you for taking the time. I know how busy you are, and this has been a real inspiration for me, and I hope for the listeners as well.
My pleasure, and I'm going to put you on the spot, David. I hope you'll come join us at TAW one of these years and help teach the next generation some trial skills.
It'd be my pleasure. I'd love it, and I'd love to come back to the law school, my old home. So anytime, Professor. Thank you.
Good talking to you.
Hey, thanks. Thanks so much.
All right. Bye now.
What a treat it was to speak to Professor Sullivan about the Aaron Hernandez case. It's so sad what happened to Hernandez. We'll never know exactly what happened or why it happened, but we do know that when you have great trial lawyers like Professor Sullivan and Jose Baez, anything is possible, even against all odds. They won this case when no one thought they could. And we'll talk more about these very difficult trials, how to win them, with some great upcoming guests in For the Defense. I'll see you next Tuesday. Talk to you soon. Thank you for listening.